Good evening and welcome to this evening's discussion on sustainable communities, collaborating, planning, delivering. Brought to you by Melbourne Conversations, the City of Melbourne's program of free public talks and forums in association with future leaders. I'm Peter Mayers from the Grattan Institute, which is an independent public policy think tank based here in Melbourne, and I work at Grattan as a fellow on the Cities program. So I'm very pleased, and it's appropriate, I think, to be your MC for this evening. This event coincides with the C40 workshop. C40 is a group of 40 global cities working together on combating climate change. And we're very lucky to have some of the leading participants in the C40 workshop who will speak to us this evening. I'd like to thank C40 for supporting this event, along with a number of other supporters, Federation Square, of course, and others who've lent their support to C40, Lend-Lease Development, the Australian Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, the Green Building Council of Australia, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, Places Victoria, and the World Green Building Council. To get us started this evening with a few words of welcome, I'd like to invite the City of Melbourne Councillor Cathy Oak to the lectern. Dr. Cathy Oak has worked on sustainability issues for almost 20 years. Her roles at the City of Melbourne include Chair of the Future Melbourne Eco-City Committee, Co-Chair of the Parks and Gardens Advisory Committee, and she also chairs the board of ICLEI Oceania, ICLEI being that international organisation of local governments for sustainability. Dr. Cathy Oak.
Thank you very much. I would first like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting and conversing tonight on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders, both past and present. The last couple of days, in fact the last 4 days, have seen the C40 group, the city's climate leadership group, and other interested parties such as private developers, NGOs, other cities and organisations talking about what cities can do to act around climate change, because too often, unfortunately, cities are acting when nations aren't, and a lot of the work around climate change and climate action has been seen at the city's level. So the C40's group, the meeting that we've been hosting in Melbourne, down at the Docklands for the last few days, has seen a lot of great conversation from cities from around the world doing great things. So our goal over the last few days has been to collaborate, plan and deliver networks and how we can continue that conversation, not only with our community in Melbourne, with our local government partners in Victoria, which tomorrow ICLEI will be hosting a Sustainable Communities Forum with local government from around Australia at Zinc, actually, tomorrow. So we'll be continuing the conversation from the global level to the local level over the next couple of days. And it's been a great conversation, and yesterday actually down at the Docklands, and the Docklands has put on a great couple of days. It's been beautiful weather down there. There's not been any wind, and it's been beautiful sunshine. So it's been a great place to host our C40 meeting. And yesterday in particular, we had a really great conversation. There were developers, so we had Places Victoria, Lend-Lease, the City of Melbourne, talking about how to make our communities sustainable. And we know that sustainability isn't just about environmental sustainability, it's about social sustainability as well as economic sustainability. And getting the mix right is so important, and we've got some growth areas in the city. We've got planned areas for growth, and we need to make sure that when we're developing them, we're doing so in a sustainable way. And the conversations over the last 3 days have been very enlightening, and we'll be using those lessons. And the panellists tonight, I've met quite a few of you over the last couple of days, and including Melanie from the City of San Francisco. Yesterday I talked about my love of waste and my desire to solve some of the city's waste issues. And so this morning I was very happy that Melanie came over and told me about the great things that the City of San Francisco are doing in this particular area, and I'm sure she'll be talking about some of that today. So anyway, without further ado though, I would like to hand over to the panellists, but point out that tonight's conversation is not just about hearing from them, it's also about hearing from you, and Peter will go in further about how you get to be part of the conversation, not just asking questions but being part of the panel. And it's a great addition to the Melbourne Conversation series is how we interact better with with the participants, and there's always a great turnout for Melbourne Conversations. And thank you all for coming tonight, and I hope that you get to take part in that conversation later on this evening. So thank you again for coming on behalf of the City of Melbourne. Thank you to our panellists for not only taking part in the last few days at the C40 meeting, but for sharing your stories with the people of Melbourne, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Cathy Oak. And it is terrific to see such a big turnout here tonight. I was here last night talking about cities to a similar sized crowd. I don't know how many of you have come back twice. Either way, either there's a completely new audience and so Melbourne can turn out twice in 2 nights with a whole new set of people, or you're willing to talk about cities 2 nights in a row. Either way, I think it's a pretty promising sign for civic culture in the City of Melbourne. A quick outline of our format this evening. We have 5 speakers. They'll each give a short presentation followed by a discussion. When we start that discussion part, that conversation, we're going to move an extra chair up here. That's an empty seat, that's for you. That's the hot seat. So you can volunteer to come up here and put a question or a comment to the panel. Pithy and concise. Has to be pithy and concise so we get as many people having a turn as possible. So bear that in mind. As you're listening to our speakers, think of your question or comment and be ready to come up and sit in the hot seat. Be aware too that tonight's conversation is being recorded and filmed for subsequent publishing on YouTube and Facebook. Please turn your mobile phone to silent if you haven't done so already, though do feel free to tweet, and you can use the hashtag sustainable and the tweet at EcoCity so that we can track your tweets as well. So I'll invite our speakers to come and join me up in the comfy chairs here, and I'll introduce them very briefly to you as they come up. I'll give you a fuller introduction as they come to speak. Tonight we have for speaking ROMILLY MADEW from the Green Building Council of Australia, LIXIN from the Beijing Municipal Environment Protection Bureau, who will be accompanied on stage by interpreter Charles Chin, Melanie Nutter from the San Francisco Environment Department, Professor Jan Gehl of Gehl Architects in Copenhagen, and Professor BILLIE GILES-CORTI from the University of Melbourne. So please join me in making them welcome. Already more than half the world's population live in cities. According to some estimates, the proportion will rise to 70% by 2050. And if cities are where most people live, then clearly cities are also where we need to solve our most pressing problems like climate change, by reducing energy consumption and emissions and so on. And the challenge is how to do this while making cities that are also better places to live, where residents feel a sense of belonging and where they have a say in decision-making about the city they live in. In other words, delivering cities that are environmentally and socially sustainable will require planning and collaboration, the things that are being talked about at the C40 workshop in Melbourne, bringing together business, citizens and governments at all levels. Our first speaker this evening spends most of her waking hours thinking about these issues. ROMILLY MADEW is Chief Executive of the Green Building Council of Australia. That's the industry association responsible for making our built environment sustainable. ROMILLY MADEW.
Thanks, Peter. Although I'm here to talk about my city, which is Sydney, and hopefully we won't have any Sydney jokes this afternoon, a lot of the international delegates wonder what the issue is between our 2 cities. I would like to point out that a number of years ago, Cathy and I went to the C40 City Summit in Seoul, and I was on the Melbourne delegation, to the absolute delight of the City of Melbourne in front of the Lord Mayor of Sydney. So thank you, Cathy, for including me there. So I may talk about Sydney today, but I do feel a love of Melbourne. Just to remind you, Sydney is the most populous city in Australia. The greater metropolitan area of Sydney has approximately 4.6 million people. It is governed by both the New South Wales State Government, but more importantly, 38 local government areas. And despite what you've all heard about congestion, both on our roads and now in our airport, Sydney is certainly a world leader in terms of livability. In 2011, the Economist Intelligence Unit's Livability Index of 140 cities, where 4 of Australia's cities were in the top 10. Sydney was ranked 6th, and yes, Melbourne came in number 1. PricewaterhouseCoopers' 2011 Cities of Opportunity report, which ranks the world's cities on a vast range of indicators, placed Sydney 5th in the world behind New York, Toronto, San Francisco and Stockholm. While Sydney-siders can be proud of this, Australian cities in general are trailing the field in the sustainability stakes. Analysis from Professor Peter Newton from the Swinburne University of Technology found that city livability is being achieved at the expense of ecological sustainability. Each Australian city resident requires, on average, up to 7 global hectares of land and water to supply resources needed to support their lifestyle. And while the average human eco-footprint is 2.2 hectares, there are only 1.8 hectares of productive land and water ecosystems remaining per person on Earth. Consequently, if everyone on the planet aspired to the built environment, quality and lifestyle offered to a resident of Sydney, then 2.5 more planet Earths would be required to supply the subsequent demand on resources. A scary thought. While Australians may be justifiably proud of our livability, these livable cities are also some of the least sustainable on Earth. Furthermore, in terms of financial sustainability, Australian house prices are among the least affordable in the world. The Demographer International Housing Affordability Survey in 2011 found Australia has the most unaffordable housing market in the English-speaking world. Of the 325 markets assessed, only Hong Kong was less affordable than Sydney. Our challenge for Sydney, and indeed for all Australian cities, is to build a future that is livable, competitive, productive and environmentally sustainable. In 2008, the City of Sydney began developing the future vision for Sydney 2030. They spoke with nearly 20,000 people who live, work and play in Sydney. Overwhelmingly, they said they wanted a place where the environment matters, the economy thrives, art and culture are encouraged and supported, people feel at home, connected to local community and the wider world. They said they wanted a city that is green, global and connected. As a result, the City of Sydney developed the Sustainable Sydney 2030 plan. This includes a report card which outlines progress made under the 3 banners Green, Global, Connected. Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore has demonstrated strong leadership in her commitment to building a sustainable city and has outlined a plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030. Projects are underway to rein in greenhouse gas emissions, boost affordable housing stock and further integrate a transport system in Sydney, which we desperately need, build recreation and cultural facilities and improve city planning controls. The city's Green Infrastructure Master Plan will be the first of its kind in Australia, providing for tri-generation renewable energy, water and alternative waste treatment. What's important to note is this project is well underway. The city is earmarked to finalise its heads of agreement with one of Australia's largest energy retailers next week as part of this Green Infrastructure Plan. Other initiatives include the city's tree canopy has been mapped to guide new plantings, rain gardens are being created to treat stormwater, a cycle network encourages cyclists and streets and parks are being beautified. Bike counts over the past 12 months alone have increased by 60% in the morning peak period and an average 48% jump in the afternoon. The city is spending $18 million to almost halve carbon dioxide emissions from city properties by 2012. And this is where we're involved. As part of this commitment, it has established Sydney Better Buildings Partnership, an Australian first alliance between the city and Sydney's 14 major landlords and the Property Council and Green Building Council of Australia. The aim is to cut carbon emissions and save energy, water and waste in 60% of commercial office space in the inner city. Landmark projects as part of the partnership include Macquarie Bank's 1 Shelley Street and Dex's Property Group's 1 Bligh Street, and the home of Google at Workplace 6. Each of these buildings has achieved a 6-star Green Star office design rating, the highest you can achieve in Australia, representing world leadership in sustainable design and construction. Other showcase initiatives include Investor Property's commitment to cut energy usage across its portfolio, and the University of Technology Sydney's $9 million energy efficiency campus upgrade, which aims to reduce the institution's greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2021. Sydney is also a member of the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which we've been meeting all week, which is working together to share information and demonstrate leadership in tackling climate change. There's a lot to be done, but as the report card clearly shows, practical action is moving Sydney towards being a truly sustainable world city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ROMILLY MADEW from the Green Building Council of Australia. So we're now going to turn to some international perspectives on the challenges facing cities, beginning with the United States. Melanie Nutter is Director of the San Francisco Environment Department, which engages local residents and businesses in protecting the urban environment and enhancing sustainability. And having worked for the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, Melanie Nutter also understands how local and national politics intersect in the United States. Melanie.
Good evening. Thank you very much to Peter for that introduction. I'm so pleased to be here tonight to be part of Melbourne Conversations. And as Peter said, I do bring a perspective from the City and County of San Francisco. I did want to also thank Jeff Taylor for the invitation, as well as the City of Melbourne for hosting the event tonight. So the department that I run for the City and County of San Francisco is a city agency that does have 3 distinct missions. The first one is to protect the natural environment. The next one is to promote social equity. And finally, to expand the green economy. So really thinking about sustainability in that fashion, we do work to fulfill all 3 of those missions. And for those of you who don't know, the City and County of San Francisco is an area that is 7 miles by 7 miles, so it's quite compact, and we have about 800,000 residents. So one of the things that has really driven sustainability is the fact that we are a very dense community. Tonight, what I wanted to do is share a little bit with you about how the City and County of San Francisco just recently was awarded the greenest city in North America by Siemens and the Economist Intelligence Unit. This was a great honor for us to receive last year, and it really speaks to a lot of the ambitious policies and innovative programs that we've implemented at the local level that I'd love to share tonight. So as Peter mentioned, why do cities matter? Why do we care about taking action at the local level? And as you heard, over 50% of the world's population now does live in urban areas and comprises about 2% of the overall landmass around the world. But also in cities, 80% of the world's carbon emissions do come from cities. So as Peter said, cities are a very large part of the current problem when it comes to environmental protection and climate change, but they also have to be a part of the solution. So in San Francisco, we have set some very ambitious goals to reduce our carbon emissions. The goal that we are currently working towards is to reduce our carbon emissions by 25% by 2017. We're right now at about 12% below 1990 levels, which is the baseline that we're using. So as I mentioned, San Francisco has a culture where we have always been willing and interested in taking risks when it comes to sustainability. San Francisco has prided itself on being first to incubate a new idea and first to attempt an innovative way to tackle a problem. Some of the innovative policies and programs that we are focused on, particularly focused on reducing our carbon emissions, we're one of the first US cities to roll out a robust electric vehicle infrastructure. So although we are a transit-first city and we promote residents going to take transit, use bikes or walk, we do realize that single occupancy vehicles are still a part of our transit system. And so we are rolling out a robust infrastructure to reduce carbon emissions from fossil fuel. And also in San Francisco, about 56% of our carbon emissions do come from buildings. So the building sector is critical for us to address. As Kathy mentioned, our Zero Waste program is something that we're very proud of. It's a program that is leading the nation in the U.S. for reducing our waste. We have set a very ambitious goal of reaching zero waste by 2020. We right now are diverting from the landfill 78% of our waste. And this has really come from a toolbox of innovative policies and mandates, financial incentives, and a robust outreach and education program that has helped us get that much closer to our ambitious goal of diverting 100% from the landfill. We're one of the first U.S. cities to have a mandatory ban on plastic bags as well as on styrofoam. Those were two ordinances that we passed a few years ago. We're also one of the first U.S. cities to pass a mandatory composting and recycling law. With that, I know Kathy was very excited about hearing about. This is an ordinance that has really allowed us to work in communities to ensure that recycling and composting is consistent and utilized by residents and the business sector. And another component to our zero waste program that's been very successful is financial incentives. We have something called a pay-as-you-throw structure, where the more that you recycle and compost, the lower your garbage bill. So not only does reducing your waste help to protect the environment, it also is a financial incentive and helps the bottom line for businesses as well as for families. And I would also mention our composting program. We have a very robust composting program where all of the compost that's collected throughout the city and county of San Francisco is taken to a facility right outside of the city to become organic compost, and it is then sold back to agricultural land and farms in the North Bay of San Francisco. That is basically closing the farm to fork to farm loop. Last thing I'll just mention on our waste program, Recology, which is our private sector partner that's helping us to implement our zero waste goal, does employ 1,000 individuals in San Francisco, so it's a job creation measure as well. On the green building front, as I mentioned, we need to tackle the building sector in San Francisco and to ensure we can reduce our carbon emissions. We recently did win an award from the World Green Building Council for the best green city building policy along with New York City. We were very honored to receive that award, and it again came from some very ambitious forward-thinking ordinances and policies that we put in place. The one that I wanted to mention is that all new construction and major renovations in San Francisco are now required to meet LEED Gold standards. LEED is similar to your Green Star program, so that is something that is right now mandated in San Francisco. In addition, we launched a new program. It's an ordinance, the existing commercial building ordinance, that requires all commercial buildings 10,000 square feet or over to benchmark their energy use and provide that data to the city, as well as do an audit every 5 years. We did that ordinance in conjunction with industry, who said it is a win-win to collect that information and act on it. Not only, again, is it reducing carbon emissions, but building owners and property owners know that the greener their building is in San Francisco, the lower their vacancy rate, as well as the lower the operating costs are for the building. So it really has been a win-win in San Francisco. On the municipal front, we are leading the way. We have a number of buildings on the municipal side that are LEED certified, again, similar to your Green Star standard. 52 municipal projects are either LEED certified or seeking certification. And on the commercial side, since 2008, LEED certified commercial space has increased by 500%. Just recently, the California Academy of Sciences, which is one of our banner museums and institutions, as well as the iconic Transamerica Pyramid, have recently announced LEED Platinum status. So it is very much becoming an everyday occurrence for a building to be LEED certified. On the energy efficiency and renewables side, we have another ambitious goal that we've put in place to have the city renewably powered 100% within the next 10 years. The mayor is currently leading a task force to look at how we can do that. One of the programs that we'll be launching soon is called Community Choice Aggregation. It's a local program where individuals in San Francisco can opt to purchase greener power than the power they're able to access through the utility. It would be run by the city, and it's a program that's about to launch, but that's one of the key components to our green energy program. I'll also mention, because I know I'm running out of time, there's a lot to cover and a lot that I wanted to share. Just two other things I wanted to mention on this. We have something called the solar map, which is an interactive map where you can enter an address and find out the solar potential as well as the rebates for any residents in San Francisco. That has helped us to install about 2,800 solar installations in the city over the past few years. And again, as Kathy mentioned in thinking about really how do we not only protect the environment, but how are we helping communities and creating jobs? We run a jobs program that's called Environment Now, where we hire unemployed parents in the city and county of San Francisco to basically help with outreach and education on everything from zero waste to energy efficiency to renewable energy to working in the schools. And we right now have about 40 individuals employed in that program, and it's a 2-year program. It's been very, very successful. And then finally, just to mention, in San Francisco, we do think of the city as a sustainable community. And I hope that what I've demonstrated tonight is that the entire city really is a sustainable community. But we also do have a number of developments that are being planned for the next few years on Navy property, as well as some underutilized property along the port. Again, developments that will be seeking LEED and D certification for the entire community, mirroring a lot of the ordinances and policies that I've described tonight. So just in closing, in San Francisco, we do picture a future where there isn't a green job that's separate than a regular job. There isn't a green building that's separate than a regular building. We really do want a future where sustainability isn't embedded in everything that we do. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share our story tonight. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Melanie Nutter from the City of San Francisco. A very impressive set of things that San Francisco is doing there, and I certainly have some questions I'd like to ask about that later on. But we'll shift now our gaze from a North American gaze to a European gaze, if you like, although our next speaker does seem to spend an awful lot of time here in Australia. With his emphasis on creating streetscapes that have a 5 km/h scale rather than a 60 km/h scale, Professor Jan Gehl has had a significant influence in increasing the sociability of many Australian cities, Melbourne in particular. And his engrossing book, Cities for People, has been well thumbed by the Grattan Institute, as you can see. It's also been quite an influence on our latest report, Social Cities, which you can download from the Grattan Institute website. Jan Gehl has won a string of international prizes. He's got a swag of honorary degrees, and his firm, Gehl Architects in Copenhagen, Denmark, continues to work at the cutting edge of architecture and urban design. Jan Gehl.
Being an architect and having 8 minutes, I will still lean heavily on images. Sorry about that. We architects need to do that. This will be the longest 8 minutes in my life. My point is, I'll talk about how to kill 5 birds with 1 stone. I'm very sorry about the birds, but the point is that if we have a policy where we are sweet to people in our cities, where we really try to make a fantastic, livable city for people, then actually we also address livability, attractive city, safe city, sustainable city, and healthy city. And I think that my point here tonight is we hear so much about we shall have healthy cities, we shall have sustainable cities, we shall have crime preventive cities, and we shall have livable cities. And as far as I'm concerned, it's very important that we don't get carried away with anything, but realize that the main point is to have a holistic city policy which aims at making good places for people to live and grow. And by doing so, actually, we can address the other things very well. I shall start to go through it very, very quickly. 50 years ago, roughly, we had this great change of paradigm in city planning where we went from building traditional cities with streets and squares to building individual buildings where you can walk around them. and the planners went up in aeroplanes and started to drop their buildings down. The architects were hovering in helicopters over the various areas, and nobody actually were asked to look after where the people were. Here you can see the situation. Here they are flying around, dropping, we call them the bird-shit architects. And all this about dropping buildings down and seeing what is left over led to, among other things, much too much space for far too few people. You could go down in Docklands and study it in great detail. The other paradigm which happens, change a paradigm which really had an impact on the way we build our cities and we organize our environments, were the invasion of the motor car, which again started in the big way about 50 years ago and have ever since completely confused the quality issues, and in many places still think that the point of city planning is to make the cars happy. This is the situation as it has developed in many places, and one would say it's not that bad no more or something like that. But look at this picture which I took a month ago in Moscow, and you can see that still the invasion of motor cars is a major problem in many places around the world. But it is certainly my conviction that after 50 years, we are now quickly seeing a change of paradigm. We are running full speed into a new city planning paradigm. We want a lively city, attractive city, safe city, sustainable city, and healthy city. We not only want them, we have to achieve quite a few of these things. And my point is that if we invite people to walk and bicycle and really look after the well-being of people in our communities, in our neighborhoods, we actually have a city which is much better in these 5 areas. We are very keen about having a lively and livable city. And of course, in the modern day and time, we live more and more spread out. We live more and more privatized. The households are smaller. We have bigger and bigger homes in the same area, which for 100 years ago had 2,000 inhabitants. On the same number of square meters today, you have 300 inhabitants. And we have all these indirect communication, but all we know is that meeting your fellow citizens in the public spaces is more and more interesting and popular. Whenever we make the right things and put the act together, we can see people coming out in great numbers, because the greatest interest of human beings are human beings. Also, if we focus more on people planning, we have a better scale, the cities become more attractive, and also we have attraction number 1, which is people as an important part of our urban environment. If people are invited to use the cities more, we have safer cities, we have the feeling of safety, and it's also real safety and a more pleasant atmosphere in our cities. The idea about sustainability, of course, is the more we bicycle and the more we walk, the better for the climate issues. But also there's a very important relation between public realm and good public transportation. Good public transportation, of which we'll see much, much more in the years to come, is one side of the coin. The other side is how you get to the light rail or the train or whatever. You have to be able to walk or bicycle in comfort and safety 24 hours a day, and you need a bloody good public realm to do that. And you will have to use that anyway. So these things are linked closely together. We will hear later today that also we have increasingly got a health problem because of the way we build our cities. I'll not go more into it because so many people have spent time studying this in great depth, and Billie will allude on this a little bit later. But we have realized that we cannot trust people to go by escalators to fitness centers as a health policy, because they don't throughout their lives. I'll not go into details, but they do it in small little periods, and we have good intentions, but we never really fulfill them. And so we have found across the world that the best health policy, the best way of keeping down the health cost is to make cities where people use their own muscles as a part of their daily doings. That's why we now have one city after the other who have a firm policy that they will invite people to walk and to bicycle as much as possible, not only on Sundays, but certainly mostly in the course of their daily doings. Such an invitation to visit a few of these cities. Such a city is indeed Copenhagen. And again, there's no time to talk about details. Copenhagen started to push the cars out 50 years ago this year. So we have been at it for 50 years to make the city better and better for pedestrians and public life for 50 years now. It's not only the city center, but actually now it's the whole city. And we can see that the 4-lane streets are being turned into 2-lane streets with median and trees and bicycle lanes. We can see that the conditions for school children to walk to school is being improved. There's a number of things. And Copenhagen now has an official policy. We will be the best city for people in the world, and we have very few years to do all this, walking 20% more and all that. But we are trying to do it. But the other part of the Copenhagen policy has been in the same 50 years to do whatever you can to invite people to bicycle more and more. We have seen that the more infrastructure there are, the more people bicycle. We are up now to 37% of everybody going to work in Copenhagen arriving on their bicycle. And of course that gives us by now some problems because we have this awful congestion on the bicycle lanes. And we have to take in even more parking spaces and more car lanes to accommodate the bicycles. It's one of the most wonderful problems to have in a city, I can assure you. Also, Copenhagen now has a new bicycle policy that they say we are not going only to be rather good, but we will be the best city for bicycling in the world. And again, there is a number of goals which should be reached at various points, and they are full speed into putting them in effect. Could I mention other cities? Yes, indeed. There are, as we have heard, a number of Australian cities who are well on their way with policies along these lines. Melbourne, you may know much more than I do about it, but there has been now for 20 years a policy about widening the sidewalks. Say in Melbourne we have streets, in Melbourne we walk, and to walk pleasantly you need trees to shade you, and you need beautiful sidewalks and furniture, and all this has very systematically been provided in Melbourne over a long string of years, and that has been noticed all over the world and have made Melbourne famous as one of the nicest and most livable cities in the world. You know all about the lane policy, and we know by now quite a bit about that all these policies have led to the city being much more vibrant, many more people coming to Melbourne. You have by now the world record in cafe chairs per hectare. And I'm worried that the whole Melbourne will slide into the Yarra River under the weight of cafe chairs. But I think that's a wonderful problem to have, actually. So get on with it. You have 15,000 cafe chairs in the city center. That's unheard of. In Copenhagen, we only have 7,000 cafe chairs. Lucky you. But what is interesting, Melbourne has one time after the other in the last 10 years become the most livable city in the world in one list or the other list or the third list. It is very interesting to see which cities get these livable ratings. They are all cities which have a high profile in catering for people in the city, the pedestrians, the public life, and the bicycles. All of them are. It's also interesting that there's not a single city from UK on these lists. That's just one thing. And We heard that there's a little fight in Australia about who is first in one or the other, and you can settle that when I'm gone. A little bit north of here, we have Sydney. It's a fantastic city for many things, but on a weekday walking in the city center, it's not a very good city, I must say. But they have this glorious 2030 plan, and there is a number of things afoot. And soon we'll see George Street being turned into a tram, and like Swanson Street, whatever. And also we have seen the bicycle program rolling out. Not so many yet, but it's coming fast. And one thing that I have really think that Sydney is the best in the world, that's making posters about their policy. And I think that's great, because then you tell your citizens, this is the policy, this is where we are going, and this is why we are putting in bicycle tracks and whatever. We are doing it not to harass you, but to make a better world and address some of the major issues in this world. Other cities could be mentioned here, like New York City, where only 5 years ago, Mayor Bloomberg declared that it would be the most sustainable city metropole in the world, and he started right away this plan about planting 1 million trees and making 6,000 kilometers of bicycle lanes. He said, we are a compact city, we have wide streets, we are flat, we bicycle. And we have 1 million commuter cars, we get rid of them. People can bicycle or take the metro. And they have started in the big way to put in bicycle lanes all over the city. And also they realized they didn't have many good public spaces, put squares like they have in other cities. This is Times Square 2 years ago in the spring, 2 years ago in the fall. It is all an experiment. Half a year later, Mayor Bloomberg said, it's not experiment no more. It's here to stay. It's one of the best, greatest success in the history of the city. So I'll end up by saying, when they can make it on Broadway, you can make it anywhere. Welcome to the 21st.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jan Gehl. And I should mention that there are flyers for Jan Gehl's book on the 2 tables at the back as you go out if you want to grab a flyer, if you want to know how to order it. If Copenhagen isn't already the best city for bicycling in the world, I don't know which one is. I mean, it has the aim of being the best city for cycling by 2015. Where, Amsterdam? I mean, is there... I'm not sure there's anywhere else.
We have to say that we are not there yet, or to get a move on. So, but it is disputed.
Yeah, okay. So from European and US perspectives, we're going to have a perspective from Asia. LIXIN is Deputy Chief of the Air Pollution Control Division in the Beijing Municipal Environmental Protection Bureau, an organisation responsible for controlling air quality and developing policies and regulations and standards to limit pollutants. Now, if you've ever been to Beijing, and I have, you'll know this is a pretty challenging job. The Chinese capital has a population of close to 20 million people, and despite a highly developed and very efficient public transport system, the city's traffic is something to behold, and it produces a fair bit of smog as well. Please welcome Ms. LIXIN.
Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And it's a great pleasure to be invited to attend Melbourne Conversation event. And I take this opportunity to share with you air quality improvement practice and achievements in Beijing. And the first part is background information. Beijing, the capital city of China, has a total land area of 16,400 square kilometers, and 1/3 is plain area. There are around 20 million citizens, which still grows by 0.5 million every year. In recent years, Beijing has been under rapid economic and social development, with GDP growth at 8 to 10% per year, and GDP per capita exceeded $12,000 last year. And the second part is Beijing's sustainable development strategy. Facing the great challenge by the economic and social development, Beijing took 2008 Olympic Games as a good opportunity, raised the Green Olympic concept. After Olympic Games, to sustain the effort, Beijing transferred the concept into city development strategy and set a goal to build Green Beijing. And the Green Beijing Action Plan was developed and implemented. I'm happy to share with you our actions and achievements. The third part is clean actions. And the first action is to restructure the industry. Efforts are made to restructure the industry and transform development pattern. New high-tech industry cities and modern service industry are encouraged, while closing heavily polluted industrial process and business. Over 200 high energy consumption polluting plants were closed down or relocated from the urban area in the past 13 years. Up to now, output of tertiary industry takes over 76% in the total GDP. And the second action is to optimize energy structure. Natural gas supply increased from 1.4 billion cubic meters in 2001 to 7.6 billion cubic meters in last year. More than 16,000 coal-burning boilers in urban area and 44,000 coal-burning cooking utilities in the whole city have been changed to use natural gas. In central urban area, more than 170,000 Bangla houses converted their heating coal-burning stoves to electric heating devices. Solar energy and other type of renewable energy is promoted. Up to now, electricity, natural gas, and other types of clean fuel exceeded 70% of total first-use energy consumption. The third action is to improve energy efficiency. Energy renovation and energy saving audit have been conducted in power generation, oil refinery, building materials, and other high energy consumption industries. New buildings are required to meet energy saving standards, which requires that the energy saving reaches 65%. In-use buildings are called to conduct energy saving renovation. And new energy efficiency lamps are distributed at communities at subsidized price. With these measures, the annual average unit GDP energy consumption declined by 5.8%. And the fourth action is accelerate vehicle pollution control. Beijing's vehicle fleet exceeded 5 million in this year. Facing the great pressure, more stringent vehicle emission standards and fuel quality standards are enforced. Euro 4 standards were applied in 2008, and Euro 5 will be implemented this year. And 380,000 high-polluting old vehicles have been scrapped off under supporting economic incentives. New energy bus and transport vehicles are encouraged. More than 5,000 new energy buses, including electric and LNG buses, will be put into operation this year. And the fifth is to enhance the public transportation infrastructure. Total mileage of the metro system was expanded from 40 kilometers in 2001 to 372 kilometers in 2011. Public transportation system takes 40% of daily passengers trip now. Total mileage of the metro system will reach 660 kilometers in 2015, and the public transportation system will take 50% of daily passengers trips by that time. And the sixth action is to improve the eco-environment. Through greening and deforestation in mountains, plains, and urban areas, 3 green shelter belts will be established. The forest coverage rate reached 53%, and the park grassland area per person reached 15 square kilometers last year. And the 7th is public awareness program. And the public participation program for promoting resource efficiency and environmental friendly living and consumption style is launched. Green transportation concept is promoted. Cars are required to stop for 1 day every week. And public awareness on environmental protection and climate change is raised. Now, the last is our achievements. Implementation of these measures has resulted in significant improvement of environmental quality. Even Beijing is under rapid social and economic development. The pollutant concentration in the air is decreased dramatically. Air quality gets better and better. And in a certain period of future, the high-speed economic growth in Beijing will sustain. The scale of city construction, vehicle fleet, and population will continue to increase. The conflicts among population, natural resources, and the environment continue to be dominant. But the workshop has built a platform for the communications among cities to explore solutions toward sustainable communities and cities. And this C40 workshop is very helpful for all of us. That's all my speech. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. LIXIN from Beijing. Remarkable. We think Melbourne's growing fast, and it is. Imagine growing at 500,000 people a year. Imagine expanding your metro system from 40 kilometres of track to 372 kilometres of track in 10 years. Absolutely extraordinary. Our final speaker brings us back to Australia. Billie GILES-CORTI is Professor in the Melbourne School of Population Health and Director of the McCaughey Centre, the VicHealth Centre for the Promotion of Mental Health and Community Wellbeing at the University of Melbourne. And like Grattan, she too has just published a very interesting report, one published together with the Heart Foundation, looking at what increasing the density in Australian cities might mean for public health, and canvassing ways to maximise the benefits of density and minimise the harm of density. Please welcome Professor Billie GILES-CORTI.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to put a health perspective on the sorts of discussions we've had. And there's no question that a healthy city is a sustainable city, and so the sorts of things we've been talking today about air quality control, about putting in public transport, about increasing walking and cycling are certainly going to have a big impact on public's health. Globally, we're facing a major crisis in the health sector, in fact. There's been a rapid rise of non-communicable disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, mental health. And last year, the UN met in September and had a sort of high-level UN meeting, and they said that NCDs, non-communicable diseases, are a major challenge for the development in the 21st, for development of the globe in the 21st century, which has the potential to undermine the social and economic development throughout the world. And what that's going to require to fix this problem is the sorts of things we've been talking about here, It's going to require a multi-sector approach. It's not a health sector problem. Non-communicable diseases, heart disease, cancer, mental health. This is a whole of community problem, a whole of sector problem. We're going to need all government across all sectors involved and whole society involved. So it's really quite affirming to see the sorts of things that we're talking about sustainability, because this will make a difference. The reason why the UN was saying this is the World Health Organization suggested that 80% of coronary heart disease, 90% of type 2 diabetes, and 1/3 of cancer globally could be avoided if we did 3 things. We increased our physical activity, we had a healthier diet, and we stopped smoking. And these are the sorts of things that we think, oh, this is something that individuals do, this is something that everyone can do themselves. But the truth is that actually we're recognising that this is a whole systems approach. We've actually created a society that actually encourages to be sedentary, encourages to eat as we're sort of surrounded by food and all sorts of food choices which are not necessarily healthy options, and we're really getting on top now of smoking. And that's taken a huge effort on the part of a whole global approach. Now, the sorts of things we've been talking about here about, and as Jan said, encouraging these more walkable communities that will have co-benefits from a health perspective, but across a whole range of sectors. It's not just a health issue. If we could increase walking and cycling, we would decrease traffic, which is going to be a benefit to the traffic sector. We would decrease environmental pollution, air quality, greenhouse emissions, so a benefit to the environmental sector. We'd help create safer communities, which is going to be a benefit from a policing and justice sectors. But more important than that, we'd also create a more convivial communities with enhanced social capital, which is going to help the community sector and local government. Sorts of things, the images that we saw in Jan's images show that will have a big impact and be a very positive thing for community. But what's required, and we've talked a lot about cities, and we know that Melbourne is a really livable city. Certainly, if you live close in, 10 kilometres from the city, it's a very livable city. And I think that's where we really have to start thinking. If you think in the northwest of Melbourne, I know on the scale of China, it's nothing by comparison, but in the northwest of Melbourne, we're going to be doubling the population in the next 40 years. That's what we're planning for. So in the next 10 years, we're going to be building the equivalent of Ballarat, and in the next 20 years, the equivalent of Canberra going in the northwest region of Melbourne. We're still on the outer suburbs, still building at about 15 houses per hectare. That's not very many people, and if you see what's going on in China or in other cities in the world, it's this is true of Australian cities generally, it's not just Melbourne here. So we need to be creating these more walkable neighbourhoods that's going to create conviviality, more liveliness, safety. Because if we're going to do that, we need to have high quality public transport, we need to have destinations nearby, but actually we need to be thinking about the densities that we're building in Australia. We really have to have a conversation about this, and I know it's a very controversial subject, but the whole issue of density is really important, because if you have low densities, as we have out on the fringe or just getting out of the city, this is not enough to have a good public transport system. Peter Newman, who's a sustainable transport academic, argues that to have good public transport, we need densities of around 35 houses per hectare at the minimum. Other cities of the world obviously have much higher densities than that, but at a minimum, we need that sort of density. And that would allow us to have a better public transport system, not just in inner Melbourne, but getting out of Melbourne. And the key to that is going to require that we have a diversity in housing stock, and the Grattan Institute has talked about this in its report. It's talked about the need for a social city. We need to really have a very good discussion, I think, about density. Now, the report that Peter referred to that I've just written for the Heart Foundation has looked at this, and to get the density right means we need to be thinking about a range of things. We need to be thinking about how we build the buildings, the noise attenuation. We need to be thinking about the quality of the construction in terms of noise and thermal control. We need to be thinking about governance and maintenance. We need to be thinking about who's going to live there and getting the densities right for the people who will live there. And we need to be thinking about where it's located. If it's located on busy roads and where there's arterials, we need to protect people from air pollution. We do need to be thinking about how that building is designed to protect the residents so that the balconies are not all overlooking the roads and getting the fumes from cars, the noise, the lack of interactions. We really need to have a really good conversation about that, and we need to be thinking about the amenity that's nearby, not just the transport amenity, which is incredibly important, but also the recreational amenity. If people are living in high density housing, we're going to need a conversation about the amount of public open space that we have available. There's been discussions in Melbourne about reducing the amount of public open space as we densify. I think completely the opposite. I think from a health perspective, we need to be thinking about increasing the amount of public open space for people as we live into the future. I think unless we have these conversations, we're not going to pick up the point that Melanie talked about, that San Francisco is thinking about having an social equity. Because in addition to having an attractive, safe, healthy, sustainable city, we need to be thinking about equity. And if it's people on the fringe that are going to have they don't have as much money, which is why they're living on the fringe, we need to think about how we can design our cities to get more equity into the system. So on that note, I'll hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Billie GILES-CORTI from the University of Melbourne. I've got some questions I'm going to start off with, but we're going to set up the hot seat here, I think, too, for you to come and ask questions. One point I'll make, just following on from Billie GILES-CORTI's comments there, is in the Grattan report that we just released, we also talked about the importance, if you are building denser structures, apartment buildings and so on, that you also need to create spaces within those buildings where people meet, so they're not just meeting in lifts, because we all know no one ever talks to anyone else in a lift. Now, the question I wanted to start off with is to Melanie Nutter, and I would like the rest of the panel then to respond, particularly ROMILLY. And Melanie, as you talked about all the things that are happening in San Francisco, and you talked about mandated 6-star green building codes for buildings and stuff, what went through my head is here we'd get, too much red tape, too much regulation. You know, it'll drive up the cost of new houses, it'll drive up delays in building, you know, businesses won't be able to afford it. How do you do it in San Francisco without getting that sort of response?
It's a great question. And I would say that it depends on the issue and the program, but for our zero waste program in particular, I think similar to Copenhagen's example, where it's taken 50 years to really get to where you are at today with the bike infrastructure, it's similar in San Francisco, where we were one of the first cities to have community recycling decades ago, 2 or 3 decades ago. Also in California, there was a bottle bill that was passed that provides a value of either 5 cents or 10 cents on bottles and cans, which really made them valuable. And so there really was the culture over a number of years that people became very accustomed to participating in volunteer recycling and composting programs. So by the time we got to the mandate, it wasn't something that was unusual, and it wasn't something that was out of step with where the community was. But I think there's also really an economic component that more and more we're seeing that you can not only make the argument that these mandates are helping the environment, but they do have economic benefit. Because without industry at the table, without business support, there would be a lot of pushback. And that's not to say that all of these sailed through, because certainly some of them were contentious. But being able to make both the environmental and economic argument has been really helpful on a number of policies.
ROMILLY, MADEW?
So I am going to respond to that. It's actually, you have to divide residential and non-residential. In the non-residential market in Australia, you can't not build a green building. And it's now basically the way, especially in the office market, that the market is leading. So we're quite unique in Australia in that green buildings has been market driven, and we have a very high proportion, 18% of our CBD is Green Star rated. So on the non-residential, you shouldn't be getting the debate in the papers around it costs too much, there's red tape, so on and so forth. They should know better, they're members of the Green Building Council, and that's a naughty thing to do. Where the debate is really the homes. The homes debate is because it's a different value proposition. And you're looking at first your upfront costs. So you're looking at the electricity that you're paying for now, or you're designing your new house, and you're looking at your upfront costs. We have to change the debate and conversation in Australia around the long-term costs. The business as usual for electricity is that. We need to make our houses more passive, and we can do that in Australia. We do not need to use the air conditioning we use, and our houses can be much more water efficient. And it really is taking the debate out of the argument that things like the carbon price is going to cost more. We just have to make our houses more efficient and really take that debate away. And there are elements in the industry that do that, and we really have to look at our houses need to be affordable for the future, because currently they're not. And they're also too big. That's a whole other debate.
Billie GILES-CORTI, I might just throw to you there, because if you think about the cost of housing not as the price you pay for the house when you move in, but the cost over time of living in the house, then that does also feed into the whole debate about density, doesn't it? Because it changes the mathematics really of housing.
Yes, it does. I think at the moment we talk about affordable housing, but we're not really talking about affordable living. And I really get concerned when I see us still continuing to build on the fringe, because we're providing affordable housing to people on the urban fringe in Australian cities, but actually if fuel prices go to the levels that we're expecting them to go, and we've got densities so low out there that we're not going to be able to have public transport, jobs are not available there, people are travelling long distances, the cost of living out there is going to be extremely high. So people have moved there and then are going to be in a bigger crisis than we could even hope to.
Young girl.
I think I can remember a figure from one of the American cities that the poorest people who were living furthest away used 45% of their remaining income to keep the family fleet of cars rolling. So the further out, the more you have to use of your income to get it rolling. And of course, if that's the poorest people, that's a very great problem.
People might be familiar, and if they're not, it's a great name, with the Vampire Index, which is work done at Griffith University. And Vampire, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's basically about the vulnerability of households to changes in interest rates and petrol prices. And the Vampire Index shows, again, the communities on those fringes are much more vulnerable. Now, we haven't got anyone in the hot seat here. I'm looking for it. Yes, here we go. First volunteer and then another volunteer. So we'll
While
take
you're
you first.
walking down, I just want to pick up a point that you made, Peter, about the debate about density. It's a really important, and I know Billie was talking about it as well, it is really important that we have this debate. We need to make our cities denser. But it's also about making our cities more livable and fun to be. So you don't just want a whole street of apartment buildings. No one wants to live there. If you look at cities like New York and Singapore, they're putting in mandating much more green space to people per capita, so people per square metre. So you may have an apartment block, but you'll ensure that within 5 apartment blocks there's a big green space for families to meet, kids to play, and there's been a lot of work done down in Battery Park in New York. So it's making sure that our density is a great place that we actually want to live as well.
Before we take the hot seat, having brought you up here, I'm just going to throw to Jan Gehl on this, because it's important too, isn't it, Jan Gehl, not just the quantity of green space, but the quality. I mean, we looked at in Brimbank recently. You don't think of Brimbank, people would know it, it's in the west of Melbourne. You don't think of it as a green part of Melbourne. But in fact, Brimbank has quite a reasonable supply of parks per head of population. The question is, are those parks good in terms of the way seats are located, the way equipment is located? So, Jan Gehl, it's very important what a space is like, as well as having enough of it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. In this book, which you so kindly pointed to, I talk a lot about senseless density and sensitive density. We need density, but we should make sensitive density, not to make too high buildings, make sure that people are not too high up in the sky, but are as close to the ground as we can make them. Takes more work for the architects, but it's certainly possible. Barcelona is very dense, Paris is very dense, so we don't need a forest of skyscrapers like maybe in Singapore. Also the spaces, I think that generally we make far too many spaces for far too people. I mentioned Docklands here as an example, and it's much better. Yeah, I think green spaces, that's wonderful, but the places where you walk on these should be little squares and other small green spaces, little parks, playgrounds, so that the day life and the recreation is intermingled, and there's not only place when you have recreation time, you go there and do recreation, and then you do something else another day. You shall do life. Life is not square. Life is very complicated, and in the old cities they had very little space and they could do a lot of things. Go to Venice. It's a wonderful city and it's wonderful places. You can do everything. In the city, they hardly have a park, by the way.
I was just going to mention Beijing here because I was chatting with Ms. Lee just before about one of the things I liked about Beijing when I was there is that every housing compound they have these little bits of exercise equipment that are designed, you know, they're not like the ones in Albert Park here in Melbourne where you have to be able to do chin-ups and, you know, you have to be an athlete. They're designed really for older people, I think. And is that mandated? Is that required?
Yeah, it's not the regulation as required. It's maybe some new department. The regulation requires they must have this equipment, but the older apartment, around the old apartment, no requirement.
No, and you see people using them. Okay, to our very brave hot seat questioner who's been sitting there patiently, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question was for ROMILLY. About 10 years ago in Melbourne, planners spoke to the people of Melbourne and devised Melbourne 2030 with a lot of the same sort of goals that you espoused for the Sydney 2030 plan of integrated transport and environmental concerns and about where people would live. 10 years on, Melbourne 2030 is as good as dead and buried in Melbourne. So what has Sydney 2030 learned from the failed implementation of Melbourne 2030, and what can they sort of promise to get those aspirations of the citizens into actual realistic on the ground?
I love this question, and this was not planned or planted. So what they needed to do, and you saw a slide about Plan NYC, which is the New York plan. What is needed is, plan's great. And where does it go? On the shelf. You need to have targets, you need to have metrics and indicators, and report on that plan every year. And to even make it stronger, you do what South Australian government do, and they don't report on their plan. They actually get a third party to do the peer review of their South Australian strategic plan, and they tell them how they're going. So you've got a red light on that one, an amber or a green light on how you're going on the targets you've set. That actually makes plans honest, and it shows the citizens who've committed time to saying this is what we want on how they're going. You can then vote in councils or governments if they're meeting those requirements. So in New York, Mayor Bloomberg has been very clear on what the targets they've set, and you've seen that in the evidence on what they did. They said we wanted more space for our citizens. They did it in Times Square, they had a plan and they met their target. So be honest about their targets and plans.
GILES-CORTI.
I think what we've seen when we're talking about Bloomberg, we're actually talking about leadership, and we saw it with Ken Livingstone, we see it with when you've got strong leadership.
Ken Livingstone, of course, the Lord Mayor of City of Melbourne, City of London, who brought in the congestion tax and changed the
Mayor
public transport system.
It's really that strong leadership that people are prepared to stand up and take it forward. I think that's a really critical factor, and Clover Moore, I suppose, has been very
courageous leadership.
Well, I'll leave that to you then, but good luck with it, and we'll be watching very closely in Melbourne, I'm sure, to see how you go with it for maybe our next time around.
Thank you. Okay, next question from the hot seat, please. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm new in Melbourne, and it's just my 4th year now. I actually come from Singapore, and I still go there every now and then. Now, being new and, apartment living is very famous now. I mean, very popular in almost all cities. And I think it's really quite new in Melbourne. And in most cold countries, they don't address the issue of laundry areas. And I think that is one of the appliances, one of the areas which really consume a lot of energy at home. So what happened is I have this opportunity because I just moved in. I'm an architect by profession, by the way. So I have a small apartment across this Federation Square, and I renovated it. And I have this, I imported a hanger from China, which is remote controlled. You press and it goes down, you hang your clothes, you press up, it goes up.
And it hangs out the window? Or
No. It's just inside the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then it has a dryer that keeps off the early moisture so it doesn't stink. Now, I think that is a breakthrough that if you have this equipment, it can be manually driven, by the way, because the one which is remote control, of course, there's power, but it's only connected to light switch. So the power is not really so much. Now that power is really very expensive, electricity is very expensive. So what happened is I think it's an opportunity to introduce to the society that there's this thing that you can put in your apartment, even how small the apartment is, it can be designed and it can be provided for.
So that would be an alternative to a tumble dryer, which is very energy intensive.
We know very well that we can't dry everything in the dryer, and the power it consumes is really so much. It really heats up the whole apartment, but of course that's what we need in Melbourne. But anyway, what happened is I started calling developers and architects, not so many of them yet because he gets rejections. And so one of them answered, he didn't even want to talk to me through the secretary. He says, we don't want moisture in the apartment. And I think, what is this? I thought sustainability is really a big concern in Melbourne. How come they don't address this one?
Okay.
So I guess my appeal is for the council, maybe the Society of Architects, to include utility area in apartments, especially in the city.
Yeah, look, I'll thank you very much. And I'll just add to that. I mean, in some apartment buildings, you're not allowed to hang washing on the balcony, which is like madness in my view, but yeah, Melanie.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting that you bring that up because San Francisco is right now piloting a program around looking at how to get more communities to do cold water washing, which is also a great way to save energy. And we just are starting to pilot this, looking not only at the technology that is available, but also the behavior change, because really that's a lot about how this is going to happen. And so we're doing a lot of outreach and education and using a community-based social marketing plan to see if we can actually make that transition. But it's an interesting point that you bring up, and I think it's both technology as well as behavior change that can really get people to move the needle in their own personal lives on sustainability.
Romilly, do you want to comment on the resistance of residential developers to that kind of change?
We've only had a couple of residential buildings come through. The majority of them have been healthcare, education and office, so I think it's safe, I better not.
Right. So, but it's safe to say there's a way to go on the residential sector of apartments as well as. Okay, thank you very much.
My name is Mim and I'm a Year 12 student and I'm also the Environment Captain at Melbourne Girls College. And basically, due to the fast-paced nature of the globalised world, which has been facilitated by rapid expansions in communication and technology, it's really forced our generation to be adaptable and think quickly on our toes, I think. And while I think that we can adapt quickly and change quickly, we also forget quickly. And I think that that's kind of a product of the way that we've been conditioned to constantly want new information. And we've been conditioned not to retain the urgency of the information we've received. And something I thought of while one of the panelists was speaking was that while walls protect, they also confine. And that often the infrastructure of our big cities inhibits people's abilities to reach a full understanding of the impacts they're having on the environment. So my question to the panel is, how do you make it acknowledge that young people have a voice through your policies and campaigns? And also, how do you communicate the simple fact that we have to be the leaders of today and not tomorrow?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mim.
So, we have to change how we communicate. So cities have to change how they communicate. The old style is turn up at town hall at 8 o'clock to talk about whatever the strategic plan is. And I know Melbourne has done this really well, but if you think about all the young people, they use Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you tell me all the other ones, I can't remember, but you know what they all are. They're using social media the whole time. Engage with them through social media. that is the best way of getting the, young people. I mean, my son teaches me more about social media. I don't know how to use Twitter because the 12-year-old taught me. But I communicate that way. And that is how councils have to change how they're communicating with our whole society, so it's not the 8 o'clock meetings at night, which even working mothers can't make because we've got to do homework. So social media is the answer.
So great question, and I do think that this is something that San Francisco is doing and starting to do very, very well. Our mayor just appointed a chief innovation officer for the city to really look at how can we use technology as an engagement tool, as a tool for transparency, as a tool for efficiency, and we've done a couple of things. One is that we're doing hackathons in San Francisco, trying to engage young technology developers and coders who want to help the city and county of San Francisco not come to basically not to say this is the outcome that we want, but to say we can define the problem, you help us figure out what the solution is. So I think the hackathons, and then we're also starting something called Improve SF, which is again about a community dialogue using technology tools to say we can define the problem, but we think the answers are out there in the community in the next generation, and hope that that's a great engagement tool on all issues, including sustainability.
So sort of crowdsourcing ideas,
Exactly.
Big data, getting
Right.
banks of data and giving it to people and getting them to find patterns and solutions in it, that sort of stuff. Thank you, Mim. We'll take... sorry. Next question.
Thanks. Look, I guess my question's a very simple one. For about 20 years, I've been listening to this conversation about all the conversations we need to have, about all the things that are wrong with our planning. And the solutions are becoming quite evident too. We know the solution. So the question, I guess it's mainly for Lee, Jan and Melanie, is how come we're so ineffective at influencing policy, planning and regulation in actually getting the changes that are obviously needed, getting them underway?
Okay, so why is there, with the exception, it seems, of Copenhagen and perhaps San Francisco, why is there such a big gap between what we know we should do and what we're actually doing?
I have for many years been a great optimist because I think that things have changed, and I think that the speed of change in good directions, I can feel the tailwind for these kind of things we are talking about, catching up and being stronger and stronger. And just last week, just to mention one example, there was this big conference in Copenhagen because Denmark is chairman of European Union, about all the things which are going to be done. And one city after the other stood up and said that we will reach no zero emission in 2025. We will do half of all our energy in renewables before 2020 and whatever. So I think there is a distinct change in the air, and I also think in some of the areas which I talked about, there has been enormous improvements when they can do this in Broadway, for God's sake, that anything can happen very fast. They used 3.5 years from the start until that point was reached. So it can move very fast if there's good leadership, and there's a very strong public understanding of many of these things, and many people are just sitting there waiting for a clue about how they shall contribute. So when the leadership is there, we can see the movement going on.
Do you think it moves fast in Broadway and in Swanston Street, but not in the outer suburbs where we're continuing to build problems for the future, and we know we're doing it?
Indeed.
So,
I think that that's business as usual out there, and that will have to change. And because of the oil running out in a very foreseeable time, and because of the price of fossil fuels going up and up and up, we will see some radical changes in lifestyles and conditions, and we will see that suburbs will be abandoned and things like that will happen in the next 20 years. So it's very clever for the communities to think about what the future would be like. Peter Newman, which we have quoted all of us, is one of the guys who have really started to figure out what it would be. I was at a discussion in Belgium where we discussed Brussels 2040 plan. And then somebody suddenly said, by that time we have no oil. Is that part of the plan? Oops! that was not really part of the plan, which was interesting.
And one other thing that I think is changing for the better is that cities are working together. And for many, many years, cities have operated really in silos where a lot of policies and programs were created from scratch. There was no roadmap, and through networks like C40, like the Urban Sustainability Directors Network in the US, there's now a chance to share best practices, to accelerate, and to really bring cities along that are more risk adverse and don't want to be the first and want to know how things have worked in other communities. So I think around these issues, this is a relatively new development, and it's very positive because I do think that it will accelerate policies and programs that are working in other areas that can be exported or imported to other cities.
And can I just alert you all to the COAG, Council of Australian Governments, Capital Cities document that is being released on Monday. And it is a review of all the capital cities in Australia. And they give a report card. Now you have to go and manually do the report card on which city is best, but I'll help you, it's Adelaide. And this is, in Australia, the conversation has started, and I know it's slow, but we have a national urban policy now, and we have a Minister for Infrastructure who's very keen on cities, but the COAG report on Monday, look out for it. We've got to start pushing for more focus on cities.
Okay, I'm going to just have this very last question. I know we're running very close to time, but yeah, come on. You've come all the way down here with that bad leg, so.
That's okay, I was just sitting over there, it's fine. I'm one of the privileged people who actually get to live in the central city. I live on Hardware Lane, and it's one of the, for those who don't know, it's one of the pedestrianised laneways of Melbourne. I actually live on one of them. One of the things that we see in this city is a complete demographic gap of no young people living in the city. You don't see young families, you don't see people with babies in the centre of Australian cities. When you see families, they're usually visiting the city, they're usually, usually coming here as people who are outside of the usual demographic of a city. How have other cities, and after visiting a lot of European cities, you see this in European cities, you see families, you see babies all throughout the city. We don't have that. How can we?
It's an interesting question, and I think if you went to the outer suburbs, you'd see the opposite. You'd see only families, because all those suburbs are being built for one particular house type and one particular family structure.
And what we're seeing in Australian cities actually is we're not building inner city development for families. We don't have any social infrastructure in the cities. We don't have any, we're not really building, we're building one-bedroom apartments generally. We're not actually providing housing for people to live in the cities, not for families to live in the cities. We're actually providing it for students and investors. And I think we've got a significant problem, and that's part of the conversation. I'd just like to add to the other part of the conversation is that when we're talking about increasing density and we're thinking about the problems on the fringe, it's actually the problems in the middle suburbs or inner Melbourne where every time someone wants to talk about the building density, everyone gets up in arms, and we're very educated and mobilised, and we can stop that going on in our patch, not in my backyard, NIMBYism. And I think it's a really big issue for us in terms of equity. That's why I think the conversation's important, because it's actually the people who are more inner city who are going to be able to be the ones that will allow, through the pressures they're putting on their local government authorities and their local elected members, about whether or not the density goes ahead. And I think it's a really critical discussion that we do need to have in terms of equity.
I'll just add to that, the Grattan's work on housing, which was released last year, showed that there's also then another problem that if you just have that one housing type of family homes in the middle suburbs, as people age and want to change the type of housing they live in but stay in the suburb they've lived in for a long time and maintain the connections, the options aren't there for alternative sizes of housing. So there's, the densification potentially also has benefits for social cohesion and people maintaining their relationships. Last word to Jan Gehl.
I hope that there are some of the people from the city of Copenhagen here, because you should talk to them. In Copenhagen, I was in Vietnam. There was this lady, she was employed in Danish embassy. She's been in Copenhagen, and she said, "Do you have a baby boom in Copenhagen?" No, we can hardly reproduce ourselves. But she's been over there, and the city was crawling with kids. and they have a family policy. They have been able to maintain and make such a nice city that people with children love to stay there and be there and develop whatever. And you see a lot of children in Copenhagen. Among other things, you see a lot of them on the mothers' and fathers' bicycles or in these three-wheel cargo bikes where children are brought to kindergartens and to schools. So you see a lot of children in Copenhagen, and I think it's a sign of quality in a city if you see many children. In Hanoi, you don't see any children because it's too dangerous. They are kept away from the city. But talk to some of them because I don't know the details of this policy. I would like, however, because I've grabbed the microphone, to mention one thing about exercise and about cost and about health, whatever. I think you should reconsider your mandatory bicycle helmet. We have figured out that if mandatory bicycle helmets were introduced in Denmark, we could cut to half the bicyclists over the night. We are urging people to use bicycle helmet, but we know there are a number of situations where you can't get hold of one, or you've been to the hairdresser, or you're going on a date, or I don't know what. And it has been found out that it's much cheaper to have many people bicycling than to reduce the number of brain injuries for a small little group of fanatics who bicycle in the young age. So it is good economy if people bicycle and be a little bit more lenient about their protection. We should also have the motorists to have bulletproof dress on, just to make sure. So I think it would be fantastic if Australia took this little step to say, you can decide yourself, but you are very clever to use your helmet. That's
okay,
it.
Jan Gehl, you have. Thank you. You have brought into a very big argument in Australia, the helmet argument. I ride a bicycle, I wear a helmet. I might consider not wearing a helmet if the streets were safer to ride on. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg story here. I began wearing a helmet before they were mandatory, and within a few weeks of me putting it on, I got hit by a car. So I was very glad, and I've worn one ever since. But that's that's another question.
The more people who bike, the safer it is.
I agree absolutely with you on that. A couple of quick announcements before I let you all go. If you want to keep up to date with Melbourne Conversations, be alerted to future Melbourne Conversations, you can leave your details on the forms at the back there. You can also follow Melbourne Conversations on Facebook or on Twitter at Melbourne Convo. As I said, the Grattan Institute's latest report is available on our website, grattan.edu.au. The report that Billie GILES-CORTI has written about density and public health is on the Heart Foundation website. I'd like to thank the City of Melbourne, Federation Square, and future leaders for making tonight's event possible. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening and for engaging, and especially those brave souls who came up to the hot seat. And above all, please join me in thanking our speakers this evening.